And welcome back to Life Unrehearsed. Matt Delvecchio here, Special Society of Montreal for their annual IG Walk for Alzheimer's that was held today. We had them on Life Unrehearsed a couple of weeks ago, and they had great weather for today's event. Very, very successful event. Congratulations for a very important cause. All right. As our population continues to age and families are taking care of their aging family members, being well prepared for one's senior years and advocating for their rights is so important. I see it every week in my business dealing with families that are concerned about themselves or their parents or their grandparents. Some families are well prepared, who've had good conversations, sometimes uncomfortable conversations, and yet other families have not dealt with it at all or simply didn't want to deal with it because of those uncomfortable conversations. And they're the ones that are left scrambling. Well, joining me today to talk about his book, Advocacy and Aging, is Marc Seguin. Amidst the challenges faced by older adults, this book offers actionable strategies and expert insights for effective advocacy. And from defining planning pillars, which you're going to hear a little bit about, to pushing for conversation around critical topics, Advocacy and Aging equips readers with the tools to make a difference. Marc, welcome to Life Unrehearsed.
Thank you very much for having me. And what a beautiful day it was, and great to hear that the weather was there for the walk today.
Yeah, and it was right across the country, and so glad they had great weather for really an important event. And Marc, really thank you for taking some time here on a Sunday. Your book is great, very informative, and we want to spread the word here on sometimes some uncomfortable topics, not making you feel a little uneasy to discuss these things with family and parents and so on. But give us a brief summary of your book, Advocacy in Aging.
Well, the book deals really with the reality that we're all living longer. So the medical science, or for what it is, are keeping us alive quite long, and that's a great opportunity for quality of life. But with that comes the significant likelihood that we will go through a life transition with some degraded capabilities. Some may not. Some may have to go through multiple steps, whether it's a life event, an accident, or natural aging or illness. And the whole idea is to be prepared for those unplanned life transition, and you want to build a team of advocates around you to ensure the continuity and the consistency in the management of not only your financial affairs but your physical and mental affairs. We all deserve peace of mind. We all deserve quality of life, and if you could get organized and have your affairs well organized, communicated with your team of advocates and ready for transition, I think it will put you at ease, and you could go and live your life and enjoy life to the fullest.
And, I'm glad you mentioned building a team, because it really is about that. We're going to talk a little bit more about that specifically, because we tend to think, I could do this on my own and I could deal with it. I don't want to bother others, but it really is so important to build that team. And it's personal to you here, Marc. What inspired you to write it?
Well, it's interesting because I never really thought I'd write a book, and certainly my school grade teacher would not believe that I wrote a book. But, as I was learning about the aging and those realities, and through my own family, my in-laws and so on, I've started developing a framework literally for myself. And I would share my learnings and my experiences with friends and family and colleagues. And people were actually quite interested, more interested on anything I've talked about. So, that got my attention. I did think about writing a few times, but really, it's one day I actually received a book on my birthday that was dealing more with, wills and legacy and estates and what happens after you die. And it was promoting a lot of open communication. And really it triggered me that we not only need to talk about what happens after you die, but you need to evolve the communication for the living years. And you need to communicate your values, your beliefs, your wishes, and have them well understood so that, when the time comes, that the loved ones around you are ready to jump in and be there to help, because really what people find out is people want to help. So.
Yeah, so true. And like you mentioned, we are living longer, and we have to deal with these issues while we're living. I've had a notary on, in fact, last week, talking about wills and the importance of wills, which is so important. But let's deal with our living years as well. So listening to Life Unrehearsed, Matt Delvecchio here, and I'm talking to Marc Seguin about advocacy in aging. And in your book, Advocacy in Aging, you talk about the 5 planning pillars, Marc, that really facilitates the planning for our senior years. Tell us about these 5 planning pillars.
Yeah, well, the best way to simplify is I use one word and I call it PACT, P-A-C-T. And it's all about making a pact with yourself, making a pact with your loved one. The P stands for planning, and with a particular focus on, as well as the legal foundation. And I heard your talk last week, and it was excellent. So that's what I talk about in a little bit more. So the A, it's about activating your plan. So it's a good thing to have a plan, but it needs to be ready to be executed. And you want to also document your estate and your wishes properly. And I have this benchmark that says, if something happens to me, I want that within 24 hours, the people around me be able to smoothly operate my affairs. And operate means more than trying to figure out my affairs. It means that they're familiar with them. They know where to find the information. And when they do go to a financial institution, they're accepted because they've already been activated with the power of attorneys or whatever documentation. The C stands for communication. I'm a big fan of open communication, not only between an individual and the delegates and the wills and the power of attorney, but with family and even the broader team of advocates, which could include healthcare providers, your financial advisors, accountants, people that advise you on home care and so on. And I'm a big fan of the concept of a yearly family meeting. Mm-hmm. And finally, T is for transition, and transition is about planning to have the management of your affairs to gradually transition. And there's no moment like now to do so. And the early stage of transition is basically just making other people familiar with your affairs, especially the delegates in your power of attorney. So in summary, that's the framework. It covers all aspects. There's experts in each of the domains, so I don't go necessarily deep in each of the domain, but it's taking the principle of what needs to be put in place in each domain, what are the criteria, and bring it all together.
Talking with Marc Seguin here on Life Unrehearsed about advocacy and aging. I like that pact. Makes a lot of sense. And I like the activating. It's so often, if something happens to you, do family members know where to go? Even passwords for things, for social media even, and accounts, and obviously financial accounts. So know how to be able to activate that as well. And now, Marc, I want to talk about some of the key challenges that older adults are facing today.
Well, I think there's a long list of challenges, and I'll keep thinking of what are the main challenges and so on. But from where I come, I think the biggest challenge that most of the aging adults have is to face the reality and accept the reality that we all go through various life transitions. And we will go through degraded capabilities and the need for support. No one likes to admit that. But I think the day that you admit that, and that was a big trigger for me. I was trying to figure out how to plan for everything and every permutation. And the day I just said, I'm not only alive and one day I'll be dead, there will be a phase of degradation. And once I accepted that, it just opened up my thought process and my planning process. And it opened up the idea of getting people involved to support me the day it needs to be.
Yeah, and you mentioned life transitions, and I'm glad you did, because sometimes when we hear the word transitions, it means physically transitioning, moving, let's say, from home into an apartment or a senior living community or long-term care. But transitions could happen while at home. These are still considered life transitions while we age, while still being at home, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, the people... and it's interesting the way I need to think about that. But for me, life transitions in anything that causes a change in the normal path. And it could happen at any age. In fact, we start aging the day we're born. And, anyone at any point in time could be faced with a critical illness that fundamentally changes the path of, what they consider as their normal life path.
Right.
So, this applies to anybody, in fact.
So important is right. You know what, Marc? We're going to have you hang around. We've got so much more to talk about, including why it's so important to advocate as we age. And you're going to be talking about some resources that are going to be very useful for our listeners. And welcome back. You're listening to Life Unrehearsed on a sunny Sunday. What a weekend. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Matt Delvecchio, and I'm talking with Marc Seguin, author of Advocacy in Aging, an informative book about some of the important conversations we need to be having with our family as we age. Now, Marc, really good information prior to traffic. And in your research or personal experience, Marc, what do you believe are some misconceptions about aging?
Oh, there's a long list of misconceptions, but if I had to choose, the one that comes top to mind is that people really don't want to talk about aging. They don't want to talk about illness, the realities of degrading, and really people hesitate to engage either their parents as caregiver or vice versa, the parents to engage their children or friends. Society has to change the mindset. Mm-hmm. And there's a quote I get often from some of my readers, and one of my early readers said to me, after reading your book, I started the conversation with my parents regarding my role as their POA delegate. Somewhat unexpectedly, my parents were relieved. And you wouldn't believe how often I hear that. So it's not the lack of desire and will to have these conversations. It's finding that trigger and the comfort to get that conversation, because these are conversations I never had between these people.
Such a good point. And you mentioned the word trigger. I often use that word, trigger event. And a trigger event could be a lot of things to open up some dialogue. It could be a hospitalization. It could be a friend or a neighbor that something happened. Well, these are all trigger events that you could use to your advantage, because it just takes the guts and the courage to start that conversation. Hey, what do we want to do in situations as we age? And so I think that's a great example that you brought up as it being a misconception, because I also see that in my world where there's almost this sense of relief. We know we need to talk about it, but no, maybe we shouldn't, and until that trigger event happens to start that dialogue. And a very good point, Marc. And I would also want to ask you about what would be some of the most common services that you're seeing that people require help for?
Oh, everyone has a different context. But, if I think of my parents' case, they needed trigger. They needed the motivation, some support to get started on some of the proper planning and the open communication. They needed, and over time, the guidance to implement the full pack, right? And in their case, it was, and my parents were well into their 80s before I got involved, and my siblings got involved. My parents were the generation, they were proud. They felt that they gave everything to their children, and they gave independence, and they were happy about that. It was the sale of their house. My parents had a humble life, but I never knew much about their affairs. I thought they could live well into their hundreds because they had never been sick. They weren't taking medication. The house was always a buffer to me financially because I knew it was paid for. And the day they decided they were going to sell it, I didn't know what their affairs were, and I didn't know what they were going to do with the money, and it was a trigger to open the conversation. And it's turned out to generate an unbelievable new relationship between my parents that 10 years later I'm so thankful about.
Listening to Life Unrehearsed, Matt Delvecchio talking with Marc Seguin, author of an amazing book called Advocacy and Aging. Interesting you say about that, the sale of the house. It is difficult. Sometimes all the belongings in the house is the elephant in the room, and they tend to put things off. In your book, you talk about ways of gradually depleting valuable and cherished goods. This is so tough in terms of how you can deplete those goods, because most of them are based on memories. And if they're there, they haven't been thrown out for a reason. So any recommendations for gradually depleting valuable and cherished goods?
Well, yes, I have one clear recommendation. Every once in a while, you should kind of sit down and say, why do I have this? And if you haven't used something for whatever the amount of time, let's just say 5 years, ask yourself, why do you have this? And then I say, go and find the person or the organization that's going to enjoy this. And don't feel bad if your kids or your family or your friends are not interested in your affair, because most likely that's the case. Today, we hear a lot about, the parents, we work so hard to get this, and they want the children to have them, and the children has no interest. I make it a point that we'll deplete things gradually. Sometimes it's hard to trigger it, but once you do it, and I always have a fun experience. I won't get on here. We have limited time, but every time I say I'm going to find someone that will value this item or this memory, and I do, and it's such a positive experience, and you might as well enjoy it while you're alive, and it gets you something to do, but you end up meeting interesting people through the process.
Yeah, certainly there are wonderful organizations out there all throughout Montreal where the last thing you want to do, something you've worked so hard for, hard-earned dollars, to throw it out. And so before you throw it out, are there ways through estate sales and so on? But I see time and time again when you're able to donate to an organization that can give back, say, some furniture or a cherished item to another family in need, refugees, or students even going out, Marc. I think there's listeners here saying, okay, this all kind of makes sense, but how do I take that first step to begin the planning for senior years? What do I do as a first step normally?
The first step, a lot of people would say, let's focus on getting, and in many cases when I get people involved to get a proper financial plan. A lot of people think they have a proper financial plan, but I'm going to say the real first step and the most important to me and the most critical one is communication. So I encourage everybody to find that opportunity to create a trigger, to open up and deepen the conversation with either a parent or children or friends, and to make that first move forward about some of these conversations that need to be had. And for some people, it's, who will take care of me? Some other people, they had some cherished parts of their estates and they worry about it, or some people worried about the cottage. Any one of those that's on your mind, find a first way to open the conversation. If you have family, with your family. Otherwise, find those people that will become your advocate over time and be able to support you and represent you in critical moments.
All right. Well, Marc, we're already out of time. I want to thank you very much for taking a little time on your Sunday. How can our listeners get a hold of your book, which is called Advocacy in Aging?
Very simple. There's the website, www.advocacyinaging.com, and you got some more information about the book on the website, and it can be purchased directly from the website.
All right, that's advocacyinaging.com. Great book, lots of valuable information. Again, Marc, thank you very much for coming here on Life Unrehearsed.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, that's Marc Seguin, author of Advocacy in Aging.